The salvation of Middle-earth's greatest heroes was not a coincidence of nature, but the direct, secret intervention of the King of the Gods himself. These were not mere birds. They were sentient spirits of divine origin, angelic spies whose very existence was a closely guarded secret of the Valar. Their purpose makes the mission of the Astari, the wizards, seem blunt and overt by comparison. To ask why the Eagles did not simply fly the One Ring to Mordor is to fundamentally misunderstand their ancient nature, the divine laws that bound them, and the very fabric of the conflict between good and evil. They were a law unto themselves, proud and powerful beings who answered to one authority alone. Manwë Sulimo, the Lord of the Breath of Arda, King of the Valar and Steward of the world on behalf of the Creator. Their story begins before the first stone of the darkest fortress was ever laid, in the thought of the most powerful of all the angelic guardians. For the great eagles were not born of flesh and blood, in the conventional sense. They were Maiar, lesser spirits of the same order as Sauron, as Gandalf, as Saruman, clothed in the form of the mightiest birds ever to cleave the skies. They were Manwë, Sless eyes and his ears, but more than that, they were a final, desperate instrument of his will, to be deployed only when all other hope was lost. Their numbers were never great. They were a chosen few, an elite vanguard commanded by the most formidable of their kind. His name was Thorondor. In the elder days, when the world was young and the light of the two trees still lingered in the west, Thorondor was sent by Manwë across the sea to Middle-earth. He was to watch. The Noldoran elves had returned in exile, rebelling against the Valar to wage a hopeless war against the first and greatest Dark Lord, Morgoth. Manwë could not directly intervene in this war, for the elves had chosen their own path, but he would not abandon them to utter darkness. Thorondor was his answer. The wingspan of this great creature was said to be 30 fathoms, a staggering 180 feet, and with his pinions outstretched, he could blot out the light of the morning sun. His eyes were so keen they could pierce any shadow and see to the very bottom of the deepest pits of the earth. He and his folk established their eyries in the encircling mountains, the high, impassable peaks that shielded the hidden elven city of Gondolin from the sight of Morgoth. For centuries, they remained a silent, vigilant defense. No spy of the enemy could approach the secret kingdom. No orc patrol could pass beneath their gaze. They were the perfect sentinels, a living, breathing warning system that allowed the city to flourish in peace while the rest of the world burned in the fires of war. This was their first great purpose, to guard the last bastion of Noldoran hope against the endless malice of the enemy. But if these were divine agents of the Valar, why did they not simply strike down the enemy? If Thorondor was a Maiar of immense power, why did he not wage war upon the legions of Angband? The answer lies in the very nature of their master. Manwë, Lord of the Air, was the being in Arda who best understood the mind of the Creator, Ilúvatar. He knew that victory could not be achieved by overwhelming force. The last time the Valar had intervened directly and waged open war against Morgoth, the world itself had been broken and reshaped in the violence. Such power could not be unleashed again without catastrophic consequences. The children of Ilúvatar, elves and men, had to find their own strength and achieve their own victory. The eagles, therefore, were not a weapon of war. They were an instrument of eucatastrophe, the sudden, miraculous grace, the unexpected turn of events that snatches victory from the jaws of defeat. They were not there to fight the battles of elves and men, but to intervene in those precise, pivotal moments when a single great hero's fate could determine the fate of the entire world. That first pivotal moment came after the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, when Morgoth's victory seemed absolute. The great alliance of the elves was shattered, their kings slain, and their armies scattered. In the aftermath, Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, was captured through treachery. Morgoth, in an act of exquisite cruelty, chained him by the wrist of his right hand, and hung him from the face of Thangorodrim, the towering volcanic mountains above the gates of his fortress, Angband. There he was left to die in torment. None could reach him. The fortress of Angband was impregnable, a bastion of horror and despair. Yet Fingon, his cousin and dearest friend, would not abandon him. Alone, the valiant elf lord rode to the foot of the enemy's stronghold, a single point of light in an ocean of darkness. But he could not find a path up the sheer cliffs. In his grief and despair, he took up his harp and sang a song of Valinor, a final, defiant cry against the shadow. His song was heard. High above, where the air was thin and cold, a form was circling. It was Thorondor. Manwë had not forgotten the Noldor in their anguish. The king of the eagles descended, a silent messenger of hope from the west. He bore Fingon up, carrying him to the pinnacle where Maedhros hung, senseless and near death. But the shackle that held him was forged with Morgoth's own dark magic. It could not be broken. Maedhros, in a moment of returning consciousness, begged Fingon to slay him and end his suffering. But Fingon, in a desperate act of love and sacrifice, drew his sword and severed his cousin's hand at the wrist, freeing him from the chain. Thorondor then bore them both away, flying swiftly south, away from the horrors of Angband. This single act of rescue, this divine intervention, would change the course of the war. Maedhros, healed and humbled, relinquished his claim to the high kingship of the Noldor, mending a bitter feud that had divided the elves and allowing them to unite once more. The arrival of the eagle was not a simple rescue. It was a sign, a message from the Valar, that hope was not yet extinguished. The eagles had saved the life of a prince, an act that reshaped the entire war against Morgoth. But this was a rescue of one. Their next great deed would be a rescue of thousands, a desperate flight from a city of fire and ruin. Yet even that would pale in comparison to the day Thoron Pondor would be forced to face the Dark Lord himself, beak and talon against the embodiment of cosmic evil. Their role as guardians of Gondolin was not to last forever, for betrayal from within led Morgoth's armies to the Hidden Pass. The city fell in a storm of fire, dragons, and balrogs. As the survivors, led by the hero Tuor and the princess Idril, fled through a secret tunnel, they were ambushed on the high mountain passes by a legion of orcs led by a balrog. All seemed lost. Their escape was about to become a massacre. And then a cry echoed from the heavens. Thorondor led his eagles in a sudden, thunderous assault. They fell from the sky like golden lightning bolts, their talons like steel, their beaks like spears. They ripped and tore at the orc host, driving them back, casting many screaming from the cliffsides into the abyss below. The elves, filled with renewed hope, rallied and fought back, slaying the Balrog in a legendary duel. The path was cleared. The remnant of Gondolin, including the child Arendil, who would one day bear the hope of all the world, was saved. Once again, the eagles had intervened at the precise moment of ultimate despair to preserve the slender thread of destiny. But their greatest test was yet to come. It would not be on a battlefield, nor in the rescue of an army. It would be a confrontation born from the single most daring act of the Elder Days: the theft of a Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth himself by the mortal man, Beren, and the elven princess, Luthien. After enduring unspeakable horrors in the depths of Angband, they had succeeded. They had the jewel, and were making their escape, when Carcharoth, the greatest werewolf ever to live, awoke and bit off Beren's hand, swallowing the Silmaril with it. The hallowed light of the gem burned the beast from within, driving it mad with pain, and it fled, a creature of mindless destruction. As Beren lay dying at the gates of Angband, and Luthien collapsed in grief beside him, the Dark Lord himself stirred. Morgoth, aware of the theft, his rage a palpable force that shook the very mountains, emerged from his fortress. A towering, dark figure, terrible and majestic, he stood over the helpless pair, his great black mace, Grond, raised to utterly destroy them. This was the end. No hope remained. A shadow fell over them, a shadow that was not Morgoth's. From the heavens, Thoron Godor plunged, not as a bird of prey, but as a bolt of divine retribution. He was followed by two of his mightiest vassals, and their coming was like a storm that ripped the very air. Morgoth, the Dark Lord of all the world, looked up from his victims, his malice turning to shock and then to fury. He swung his great mace, Grond, a weapon that could shatter mountains. But the eagles were too swift. Thorondor, king of eagles, greatest of all birds that have ever been, stooped upon him and raked his face with talons harder than steel. The shriek of the Dark Lord echoed through the Iron Mountains, a cry of agony and outrage. Avala, wounded by a creature he viewed as a mere beast. In that moment of chaos, the other eagles snatched up the seemingly lifeless bodies of Beren and Luthien. Before Morgoth could recover, they were gone, soaring into the sky, carrying the heroes and the stolen Silmaril away from the gates of hell itself. Thoron Condor had faced down the physical embodiment of evil, and left his mark upon him for all time. But this raises a profound question, a question that has echoed through the ages. What are these creatures? Are they truly just birds, noble and great, but birds nonetheless? Or are they something more? The truth is a secret hidden deep within the cosmology of this world. The eagles are no mere animals. They were, in their origin, Maiar, the same order of angelic spirits as Gandalf, as Saruman, even as Sauron himself. They were divine beings, sent by Manwë, the Lord of the Air and King of the Valar, to be his eyes and ears in Middle-earth. They were spirits of the sky, clothed in the form of eagles. This changes everything. It reframes every rescue, every intervention. They were not convenient plot devices. They were agents of a divine plan. Their power immense, but also limited, bound by rules we can barely comprehend. This is the key, the answer to the greatest what if in the entire legendarium. If they are so powerful, if they can challenge the Dark Lord himself, why couldn't they just fly the ring to Mordor? The answer is not about plot holes. It's about theology. It's about the very nature of good and evil. The Eagles, as divine agents, were forbidden from direct, overwhelming interference. The fate of Middle-earth had to be decided by its own children. Elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits. Their free will was the most sacred principle of creation. For an eagle to take the ring would be for divine power to seize control, to nullify the struggle, the sacrifice, and the choice of the free peoples. And there is a darker, more terrifying reason. The One Ring corrupts absolutely. Its malice was an extension of Sauron's own, and Sauron was a Maiar of terrifying power. What do you think would happen if a being of equal, or perhaps even greater, original power took the ring? Imagine Gwaihir the Windlord, a noble spirit of the sky, claiming the ring for himself. He wouldn't become a new Sauron. He would become something far, far worse. A creature of light and air, turned into an unstoppable tyrant of absolute divine might. A king of the sky, ruling with a golden fist. The Valar themselves would have to intervene, and the world might be broken in the ensuing war. The risk was too great. The Eagles could only act at the edge of despair, to keep hope alive, not to deliver the final blow. They could save a prince from a cliff, refugees from a mountain pass, or a wizard from a prison tower. They were there to ensure the quest could continue, not to complete it themselves. And for thousands of years, that is what they did. As the Second Age fell into shadow, and the Third Age began, the watch of the Eagles continued. From their high eyries in the misty mountains, the descendants of Thorondor saw the rise and fall of kingdoms. They watched as Sauron, defeated once, slowly regained his strength, and they watched as the wise sought to counter him. It was in this age that Gwaihir the Windlord, mightiest of the Eagles of the North, would play his part. And it began with the rescue of a friend. Gandalf the Grey, having discovered the treachery of his fellow wizard Saruman, was held prisoner atop the impenetrable tower of Orthanc. Trapped 150 meters in the air, with no hope of escape, the leader of the fight against Sauron was effectively removed from the board. All seemed lost. But Gandalf, being a Maiar himself, knew the ancient ways. He knew who to call upon in his moment of need. He found a small moth, a visitor in that desolate place, and he whispered words to it, a message of desperation sent out on the wind, a prayer to the ancient lords of the sky. And the sky answered. Days later, as Gandalf sat, weakened and despairing, a shadow fell over him. It was not the shadow of Saruman's evil, but the shadow of a vast and welcome wing. Gwaihir the Windlord descended, his arrival silent and sudden. He landed on the pinnacle, his golden eyes filled with an ancient wisdom. He had received the message. He had come. Without a word, Gandalf climbed onto the eagle's broad back and was lifted away from his prison, soaring over the fortress of his enemy, a free wizard once more. This single act allowed Gandalf to reach Rivendell, to reveal Saruman's betrayal, and to help form the Fellowship of the Ring. Once again, the Eagles had not won the war, but they had saved the one person who could guide the free peoples to victory. Their intervention was precise, a nudge to the scales of fate, preserving the chance for courage and free will to win the day. But this would not be the last time Gandalf would need to call on their aid. His next encounter with them would be in circumstances far more dire, after a battle with a demon of the ancient world, in the deepest abyss and on the highest peak. A journey through death and back again. That journey through death began in the blackest pit of Moria, in a fall of fire and shadow. It was a battle that raged from the foundations of stone to the highest, forgotten peak of Xirac-Zigil. There, on the Durin's tower, Gandalf, reborn and clad in white, cast down his foe, but his own life was spent in the victory. His task was over. He had passed from thought and time, but the world was not yet done with him. A message was sent, a command given by a higher power, and once more, Gwaihir the Windlord answered the call. He flew to that desolate peak and found the wizard's broken body. He was not rescuing a friend this time. He was bearing a vessel of divine power, a spirit sent back to complete its work. He bore Gandalf to the healing hands of Galadriel in Lothlorien, a second act of salvation that would change the course of the war. And so it was that Gandalf the White was there for the final, desperate gamble. At the Black Gate of Mordor, with the armies of the West surrounded and facing utter annihilation, The last Nazgûl on their fell beasts descended for the kill. All hope was gone. But then, a cry went up. Not from the throats of men, but from the sky itself. A song of fury and freedom. The eagles were coming. They tore into the ringwraiths, mounts with a primordial fury, a storm of righteous wrath unleashed. They were the turning of the tide, a sight so glorious it gave the armies of men the heart to fight on for a few more precious moments. They did not win the battle, but they held back the darkness just long enough for one small hobbit, far away, to complete his task. When the One Ring was unmade, and the Tower of Barad-dûr crumbled to dust, the quest was achieved. But the quest-bearers were not safe. Frodo and Sam lay stranded on a pillar of rock as Mount Doom erupted around them, their lives about to be consumed by the very fires that had brought salvation. Their sacrifice was complete, but Eru's grace was not. From the sky, Gandalf called his friends a final time. Gwaihir, Landroval, and Meneldur descended into that hell of smoke and flame. They were not delivering a weapon. They were rescuing the heroes. They plucked the two hobbits from the edge of oblivion, fulfilling their truest purpose. They did not interfere with the choice of the free peoples. They saved those whose choices had saved the world. They were the final, breathtaking punctuation mark on the story of the War of the Ring. From Thorondor's first vigil to Gwaihir's final rescue, the Great Eagles were never a simple convenience. They were a promise, a symbol of hope from the powers that watched over Middle-earth. They were the ever-present possibility of grace, a divine hand that would not force the pieces on the board, but would catch the heroes when they fell. They were the music of the Valar, made manifest in feather and claw. The legendarium is filled with echoes of this divine music, of hidden powers and ancient promises kept. These are not just tales of war, but deep, theological explorations of hope, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between darkness and light. To hear more of that song, and to journey with us, from the dawn of creation to the last sailing ship from the Grey Havens, subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The history of Arda is waiting.